Okay, so now to the questions. I'll start with Annie so I can give the Minister a bit of a time to catch her breath. So, Annie, your first question. How can we get socially disadvantaged parents to get involved in schools? It's always the middle-class parents involved, and poorer children lose out because their parents don't feel empowered to get involved in schools and networking.
The most amazing part of the questions is it's like people have ESP, because you have to write them down before you heard the presentation, so I'm really impressed with that part. I think that is, one of the cruxes of the matter, and it's why it's important when we are the parents who are involved in school, that we never assume that what we think goes for everybody. And it's always tempting to go, I'm here, and I know I'm right, I always know I'm right. But we may not be, that's why we always go, there's no, parent voice, there are many parent voices. I think what's important about the parents who we don't normally see at school goes back to what I said, which is how do we get the information to them that they need at home? And how do we understand, and I'm very interested in the work that the National Parents Council is doing, how do we maybe structure our school parent bodies differently so that it's not I'm looking into a room and there's a meeting and it's got a chair and a vice chair, a secretary, and it looks like somewhere I don't belong. Sometimes they feel a little bit like a clique in the school that I don't belong to. So there are other ways to involve parents in the school, so that's get them in the door. There are different kinds of volunteering which I might feel more comfortable doing than being part of some official-looking body. But it also goes back to how are we making sure that we're communicating to parents where they are, which is either at home or belonging to community organizations, belonging to a church or a synagogue or a temple or a mosque. How are we getting to those parents there? But it's not asking them to do more, but asking them what they want, what do they need. There are models. One of the things that parents applied for funding for was to survey the parents in their schools. Again, there are challenges getting things home. My children never brought things home, but you can get to them. There are other ways. But again, it's understanding that you don't necessarily represent everybody, that there are people out there who want to feel that they belong, and that sense of belonging is incredibly important. Doesn't mean that they have to be in the school building, but that there is a school community and everybody wants to feel part of it. So it's partly not making assumptions, ensuring that if there are things that cost money, field trips, whatever, extra expenses in school, that you have a really, really easy way for everybody to partake in them if they can't afford them. But it's getting that information home, and I think that for us in Canada, that's one of the hardest things.
Thank you. Minister, due to the Department of Education cuts in funding to schools, schools are being increasingly urged to fundraise for infrastructure facilities. This is an indirect tax on the community and parents. Will this change review policy refunding to schools?
Well, I do realise this is on, is it? No. Sorry, I do very much realise that there have been cuts right across the board in all government departments, indeed in recent years following the economic collapse, and that has been very challenging for schools. And I suppose one of the things that happens, unfortunately, is that parents are asked primarily to be the fundraisers for the schools. I very much recognise that. But I suppose the positive story is that we have started to recover economically. We have more money now to spend. We got the first increase in the education budget last year, for the first increase in 6 years. Last year. It was a relatively modest increase, but it was an increase. Now, I suppose one of the problems with that is that we also have growing numbers of children, so we constantly need more classrooms, we constantly need more teachers, we need more SNAs, etc. But we did get an increase, and I will be fighting very hard for an increase again this year, and I hope a significant increase. And what that means is that there will be choices to be made about how do we start reinvesting, how do we start putting money back. So the questions will be, for example, do we look at pupil-teacher ratio, do we look at capitation? There are areas like guidance, which is more, I suppose, a post-primary issue. There are a whole lot of areas where I've been talking to the different partners in education, including yourselves, to get some sense of what the priorities are. But I don't want to lead you astray either and tell you that I'm going to have a huge amount of money to put back in this year, but I do want to start reinvesting back into the education system, and I will be looking at the various areas. So I would be very much interested in what the National Parents Council would consider to be the most important reinvestment, if you like, in terms of primary education. But I suppose, the reality is I think parents have always, to some extent, fundraised for schools, but what we want to do is to ensure that that isn't too much of a burden. I think in some ways, being involved in whatever it is, the cake sales or whatever else raises money, can be a really good networking and positive experience, but when it becomes the overall, and I think Annie referred to this, when fundraising is the thing that parents are primarily expected to do, then that is absolutely wrong, and that should not be the focus of parental involvement in schools. So it has its place, but and we have had very difficult times in recent years, but I think everybody will agree now that there is an economic recovery. There are more people working, so there are more people paying taxes and contributing to the funds that we need in order to provide for services like education. So there will be an improvement, but I don't want people to think that there's going to be a huge amount of money back in, but we will be gradually improving the situation. Thank you.
Annie, what simple techniques can a parent use for a very bright child who is not receiving extra stimulation over the curriculum in school?
I'm going to talk about fundraising for a second first. So we do keep track of fundraising in Ontario, and we have been concerned for years about a kind of an assumption that we need fundraising to augment the system. And I agree with the Minister that it's actually a great way to be involved in school. It's something, you can go and make hamburgers or, participate in the fair. And they're really, really great community building things, so we don't think we should ban fundraising. But this year, when we looked at Ontario schools, we realized the top 10% of schools in terms of fundraising raised the same amount of money as the whole bottom 76% put together. So for us, the real problem with fundraising is that it entrenches that kind of have and have not sense in schools. And it's something to worry about, not necessarily come out and make laws about, but certainly we've been asking that the province really articulate what should be there in every school that parents shouldn't be fundraising for, so it isn't concern. I think thinking about the bright child, that actually it's really doing those same things. It's really focusing on ensuring that that your expectations are there, that you're talking to them, and that you're helping them build positive attitudes. Because in fact, it's really up to them to figure out how to stimulate themselves, to entertain themselves, to stay engaged, and I think a little bit, my children were pretty bright, that I probably worried too much about feeling that I had to do other things for them. I grew up in a whole family of kind of bright people, and never occurred to my parents to worry about sort of extra things. I think it's making sure that they're out there in the world enough that we're not feeling we have to run their lives. That there are other extra things that they can do, but in fact those kids who are doing well will keep on doing well. The biggest struggle, and that was my second daughter I was so mean about, who couldn't learn to put on her coat, was when you have a child who is gifted and learning disabled, which she was. And now she's just going to graduate from university. So it's hard when you have that gap. But in a way, I think for her, I could have done more to build those social emotional skills in her, and less worrying about how to feed the bright mind. She's learned to feed her own bright mind, but those other basic skills she actually struggled with more. So I would say you do the same things, and you don't. I think we have a tendency to feel that we have to fill up our children's lives. I'm not sure we really do. But I'm not a parenting expert or an education expert.
Your questions have a bit of a running theme, Minister, in terms of money. Can the Minister indicate when the department is going to look seriously at the spiralling costs of sending children to primary school? School fees, uniform, book rental, insurance, photocopying, IT materials, arts and crafts, etc., registration and re-registration fees, school trips, school tours, etc., etc. All add up to a huge amount every year. Free education is a complete myth.
It's not a complete mess, but if I can address
Myth.
myth.
Myth. Do you want to?
Okay. Well, I'm sorry, I thought you said mess, not myth. Well, first of all, one of the things, I suppose, in terms of fees, I think somebody mentioned fees there. One of the things that we're doing in the admissions to schools bill, I'm not sure if this applies really in primary schools, but is that we will be abolishing schools actually charging people to put their names down for a school. So that will be what will be in the legislation in the admissions to schools bill, as well as the charter, etc. And another thing that will be in that bill will be that all schools must be welcoming to all children. So they will have to state a positive non-discrimination, if you like, that all children, and all the various equality grounds that they will have to state that they welcome all children. Now, obviously, there are some exceptions, like if you're a single-sex school, for example, there are obviously exceptions, but generally a statement of welcome will be in it. But just in terms of costs, my predecessor, Rory Quinn, has done some work, particularly in relation to book rental schemes, and I've been continuing that in terms of funding book rental schemes for schools. But I think there is more we can do in terms of particularly the cost of books, and we will continue to address that. I mean, the idea that you need, first of all, to have as many books as children have, I think is something that is changing more and more in terms of information technology, etc. And we will be constantly working on that. Rory also brought in some changes with regard to uniforms, and again, I would be happy to hear any suggestions. Some schools obviously don't have uniforms, some do, some have the crest built into the jumper, which is something that used to drive me crazy. I used to just cut the crest off the old jumper and stitch it back onto the new jumper. I don't know if people do that or not, but the idea that you have to buy a jumper that actually has a crest imprinted in it rather than buy a basic jumper. These are all issues, I'm sure, that are a practical concern. But then the other areas around, having to pay for printing, etc. Again, really, that does go back to capitation, and it's one of the areas that we're looking at in terms of how the department and how we nationally fund schools in terms of the yearly grants that they get from us. But there are areas that we are, as I say, now able to look at again, because like everything else that happened in recent years, those costs have been affected by the economic downturn. But as I said already, thankfully we are on the way up now.
Annie, how do we engage with parents from ethnic minorities? How best can we support them and include them in parent association, boards of management at our schools?
I think that's sort of the same as the other question, and again, it goes back to making sure that there are materials in parents, if they don't speak English, in their own language, being able to understand what their issues are, not make assumptions that they're the same. The thing that we find at People for Education is that the calls we get the most about are from newcomer parents about special education. Because it's incredibly, I don't know what it's like here, but it's very complex to navigate special education. And they're distraught sometimes, or they don't understand it, or they feel that their child is being singled out and labeled in some terrible way. So ensuring that parents, right from the beginning, there are some really wonderful programs that are sort of welcome to kindergarten programs for newcomer parents, where there are facilitators and translators talking about this is what's going to happen, this is how it works here. There are newcomers who come to Canada and go, your schools are a joke. What do you mean they play all the time? It's not like that in our schools. They end up doing quite well, but they do play a lot. So it's ensuring that everybody understands how the system works, where they can go for help, and how the complex pieces of the system work. So having materials in other languages, in parent-friendly other languages, and it's really great when parents write it as opposed to nothing against the system, but sometimes the system can write things which don't feel very parenty, and they don't feel very welcoming, so it's really nice when you have that kind of parent voice in there. But again, it's doing the outreach, not worrying about getting them to come to meetings, but going where they live and providing them with the information that they need.
Thank you. Minister, on May the 18th, 2015, the Education Minister, Jan O'Sullivan, was quoted on the newspapers as promising that in case of a yes prevailing, teaching about relationships in school will not be affected and no intention of changing the curriculum. Can she please confirm this?
Yes, the referendum, the equality referendum, was not about changing any practices in schools, so I think that's fairly straightforward answer. But maybe if I could say a little bit about the previous question as well, because we have some schools, fantastic schools in Ireland that have a huge number of different people from different ethnic backgrounds, different nationalities, different languages. One of the things I get to do as Minister is to visit schools regularly, and I've seen where this has been a fantastically positive advantage to those schools in terms of how all of the children benefit from them learning from each other's cultures. And also, one of the things we're doing some work on the language curriculum at the moment, and the whole area of how children learn language and learn second languages. And I'm particularly impressed with something we need to really build policy on, is how when children at a young age are interacting with other children whose first language is not English or is not Irish, they get a sense that you can express yourself in different ways. The words I use are not the same words that you use, but they actually mean the same thing. And I think we're relatively new to multiculturalism in Ireland. When I went to school, and we were all pretty much from the same cultural backgrounds. But I think we have a tremendous amount to learn from it, and it's a tremendously positive input into the experience of schools in Ireland. But we probably haven't fully grasped that opportunity yet, and I think we need to use it in policy development.
Annie, did you experience a reluctance on the part of schools to involve parents in areas other than fundraising? Can you recommend strategies to overcome this?
It depends on the person, I've found. So there is a sense sometimes from a kind of organizational perspective. I've actually gone to conference where they had the title of sessions were How to Deal with Difficult Parents. And I always come and go, I am a difficult parent, so here I am. I was once at a different principals conference, and there was a principal there talking about this parent who was ruining the school council, and that she was incredibly upset, and how do I deal with a parent who's actually turning a whole school council against me? Against her. And then she talked to me afterwards about this parent, and she said that she and the parent had been friends before, but then the parent's child started getting in trouble all the time and was in the principal's office a lot and was being punished, rightfully from the principal's perspective, for what he was doing, and it was making the parent very angry, and the parent was saying mean things about her at the school council, and the principal kept talking to me about how, and we used to be friends, and I finally went, oh, so you're saying she's hurt your feelings? And it was amazing because then the principal started to cry, and my mother had just died, so I started to cry too. So we were standing there at this principal's province, both of us, with just tears pouring down our faces. But what the learning in that moment was that it was about being a human being. And I think that what happens is, to teachers and to principals, and teachers, and everybody definitely does this, they go, uh-oh, parents, something bad's going to happen. And they forget sometimes that they're parents too. So they forget how it feels, and they forget that
the humanity of the exchange, that we are human beings in a place, we all care about these kids, and we're all trying to do the best. And parents forget that too. They go, the system is bad, you're being evil. So to me, it has to do with remembering the humanness. Yes, to me, it partly has to do with confidence, so different principals can feel differently about having parents have more voice in the school than just over a fundraising. And sometimes new principals are very scared by the idea of sharing with parents. So it's partly not being a scary parent yourself, so not going in there and demanding and assuming that everything you think is right for everybody. Remembering your child is not the only child in the school, there are a whole bunch of children. But on the systems side, it's also remembering that parents are there as human beings. They really care about their children, and they bring, and that's why I'm so interested in the partnership schools and this idea of what is the quality of the learning environment, and how do we have that conversation across. So we're not coming in with complaints, and we're not coming in to say parents should run schools. I really, truly do not believe parents should run schools, but that we're building a learning environment where we can share, talk, create goals together, but understand no one group has more power than the other. And I think that for parents, it's also remembering that even though, yes, we are the first educators of our children, that the people who are educating our children have actually gone to university, learned a lot of stuff that maybe we don't know, and that expertise is an important thing in this conversation. And there are things sometimes which we instinctively think, this must be right because instinctively it looks like it, and sometimes we're wrong because we don't know what the evidence is. So it's about balance, about being human, and about working together as opposed to, I want to have power over what you do.
Thank you, Annie. Minister, is there a plan in place to facilitate the setting up of boards of management within community national schools?
I don't know if Gary has asked that question.
I'm not 100% sure, but it's something we certainly look at.
Okay, so maybe we could follow up on that afterwards.
There's an answer in principle. Community national schools absolutely should have the same governance principles and so at play. I'm just not 100% clear
About the detail. Okay.
But if there's any shortfall from a governance point of view, it's an active live board for the department and all government departments, and we'll certainly make sure that any shortfall is put in place.
Yeah, I don't know if you heard that. But basically, what Gary is saying is that the same principle should apply right across schools, and there should be the same governance system. There are three of us here, myself and my two officials, and none of us know for certain what the answer is, so I suppose let's just put our hands up and say that. But that we'll certainly ensure that there is an answer and that we bring it back to you. Okay, thank you.
Annie, is parental involvement in Canada underpinned by legislation? Is it audited? Are there penalties for falling short of expected standards?
Wow, the idea of being audited for it is really scary. So again, no Canada to do with kindergarten to grade 12 education, only provinces. So yes, in Ontario it is in legislation. So it's actually written into law. That there must be parent involvement committees at the school board level, and there must be school councils. It's not audited, and I think what's important about that is maybe not auditing, but there's no really good evaluation been done. It's only been done by us, actually, and ours is lacking. And in a way, that goes back to how seriously are we really taking this? So we have this system in place, we've got these various levels, and they're there by law. There must be. We always wondered how you could make a law that people must volunteer. Anyway, but there is a law that people must volunteer, that you must have them. But in terms of the evaluation, it's not there. So that it's partly incumbent upon, there's been a lot of research done about who isn't there, again, that kind of socioeconomic divide, but I'm not sure anybody's really looking at what does really make a difference, where things could be working better, and that's why, we're going to be looking at the partnership schools piece, because when we've been looking at what we can measure in terms of the quality of the learning environment, it may have just the things in it we need.
Okay, thank you. Minister, the Department of Education issues many circulars. However, my child's school seems to pick and choose what aspects to implement. I would like to know, are these circulars mandatory? If I feel that the board has not implemented one, who should I follow this up with?
Well, the circulars would reflect either policy decisions or legislation or general guidelines in some cases in relation to what happens in schools. So I suppose it's depending on the subject in terms of what is mandatory, but I mean they must all be taken seriously and considered by schools, and in some cases they're direct reflections of legislation. In terms of who would you take it up with, I presume it is the board of management of the school, or certainly if there are concerns that can be sent directly back into us in the department. But generally speaking, concerns in relation to schools should be taken up first of all with the school itself, and then that would be the primary focus. So I don't know, does any of my officials want to add to what I've said on that?
No, thank you for that question. I mean, it's terribly important from a department point of view that there isn't any slippage in terms of what are agreed quality standards or circulars that articulate how schools should function. As you know, I mean, the first port of call, very importantly, is that a complaint or a perceived shortcoming in any circular should be raised with the school principal and with the board of management. That's a hugely important forum for that. And indeed, the patron, if that fails, and we know that it can from time to time, it can be brought to the attention of the department. The department's inspectorate, from time to time receive some risk information about a school, and when they're engaged in school inspection, they will certainly follow up on any shortcoming. And there's now quite developed in the last number of years quite a rigorous follow-up process following inspection, so that if it's validated during the inspection that there is a serious shortcoming, there's a very good process of engaging with the school, with the school's patron, and with the school's trustees to guarantee that in the future whatever shortcoming is there is made right.
Thank you, Gary. Might just ask one last question to each of the speakers then. So, Annie, in Ireland it is not general practice in the majority of schools to have parents in the classroom, which may come from a reluctance of teachers to allow parents look closely at what they do in the classroom and maybe feel as if they are being appraised. How do you go about overcoming this type of interaction between parents and teachers to the betterment of students?
I have to say these are fantastic questions. Like, they're really incredibly deep, complex ones. I also have to say, I don't think it's necessarily a good idea that parents are in classrooms. One of my favorite calls, I was describing it yesterday at the National Parents Council office. A parent phoned and said, and she was very upset because she wasn't allowed in her daughter's kindergarten class, and she really wanted to be in there, and so then instead she stood outside and watched through the window, and then the teacher put up pictures all over the windows, so she could see. And she was very, very upset. And we get a lot of calls, and usually we go, oh, that sounds like really somebody just wants them to listen. But then she said, okay, so I want to know, am I being neurotic? And I had this moment of like, oh my God, what do I say? And I thought, well, you asked. And I went, yes, you are. And she was so great, she went, thank you very much. To me, parents being in the classroom, unless you're asked and you're there to volunteer to do something, I always, how I got involved in education at all was making paper mache pigs in a kindergarten class. Every time I'm in a class, it confirms to me that teachers are gods, that I would never be able to be a teacher, that it's extraordinary what teachers do every single day with vastly different children. But having parents just in classrooms to observe is disruptive to the class. It's not helpful to teachers. And I don't think parents are the experts that sometimes we think we are about what is good education. One parent could think if the whole class is quiet and sitting at their desks and doing things very seriously, then it's a great teacher. Another parent could think that's a terrible teacher. Why aren't the kids all talking and engaged? So I actually don't think it's a good idea. I don't think it leads to a good kind of form of accountability. Unless you're invited, then it's fantastic.
Minister, your final question. I'm also conscious of the fact that there actually is quite a full box still here for you, Minister. So
maybe you can all email me after. Maybe I shouldn't say that.
Well, what we often do
when you're leaving is give you the ones that we haven't been able to go through, just so you're aware of the issues that parents have got, so we might follow up with that. But just your last question, what do you think about introducing third language in primary school, i.e. German, French or Spanish?
Well, can I say first of all that we are working on a new primary language curriculum, and that is it's really around some research that has been carried out that indicates that transfer of literacy-related skills and knowledge across languages is the basis really for how you learn languages. So in other words, that you just don't see kind of English is one language, Irish is another, German or French is another, whatever, and that they're different and separate. That basically literacy, no matter what the language is, there's certain skills, and we see very small children doing it naturally because it's their mother tongue, but that we have a general approach to the early years in particular of literacy skills. So that would give those kinds of skills for whatever language a child is learning. But then at a later stage, obviously we have two languages in schools in Ireland, being English and Irish, and many other children have another mother tongue as well. But in terms of other languages, I personally think they should be introduced early on. Not too early, obviously, but that we should at least start looking at the idea of further language study at an early age. But at the moment, we don't obviously have it in the curriculum. Maybe I say that because I studied languages myself, and I have a particular passion about languages. But we can't obviously overcrowd the primary school curriculum either, so I think anything like that has to be done extremely carefully and with thought to all of the other developmental things that young students are doing. But certainly having that approach which we're looking at in the new curriculum, we believe will be a very strong foundation for the learning of languages generally when young people approach another language at a later age. Can I just say one other thing around what you were just talking about parents in the classroom? I agree with what Andy has said, but I would just like to say that I do think that parents should always feel that they can approach the school and approach the teacher, particularly if they're individuated. I'm sure Andy agrees with that as well. Because it's one of the things that I have found in schools of particular concern to schools where the very parents that they feel they need to engage with are the ones sometimes who are reluctant to engage. They may be parents who've had a bad experience at school themselves and have negative feelings about schools. And I've talked to many principals who would say, we really want to engage those parents. So I would be interested to sort of engage with yourselves as the National Parents Council in terms of what we can do. I know that schools they really go out of their way to involve parents who may not want to be in the school, may just not even want to go over the school gate. So I do think that's a very important element of our relationship as a department with the National Parents Council, and I'd be interested in whatever way we can work with you on that. So can I thank you very much? I think it's been really interesting, and I look forward to working with you into the future. Thank you.